Welcome to Legio Mariae Podcast, the first English language podcast of the Legio Mariae in the world. And today we have episode 2. We have the joy of welcoming our dear brother, Richard Harrington. You're very welcome, brother.
I'm certainly not cheap, so certainly I'm a dear brother.
Very good. Starting very nicely. I like that. So, we're going to do this episode slightly different than we did last time with Father Graham. And I'm going to lead you, if you will. I'm going to ask some questions. And we want this to be a sense and a sort of inspiration to everyone who's going to be watching us. Starting off, Richard, do you mind me asking your age?
You should never ask a lady her age, or a gentleman, and I'm one of those two. No, I am 31 years old.
31.
I'm going to be 32 in November. God help me. And
I had the honor to be on your betrothal. You're going to be...
Yeah, we are very happy together. It was a wonderful experience. No, it was a lovely gesture because I had moved things from your former house to the next, and you were available.
Just by chance.
It was I texted like 9 people, and you were the one who was like, "Hey, I did throw out my sciatica. I busted my hump moving everything in your house up 3 damn flights of stairs. Can you be a witness to an official ceremony on like Friday?"
Just because I was off.
Just because you were off. Great. It was you and an old friend of mine, another legionary friend, Miel Biersikalik. And so a lot of people came up to me after and said, "Man, I never knew you were that close friends with Gustavo. You would like what kind? There's been some kind of fraternal bond that we haven't been aware of. Has he been inviting you over for drinks and cigars?" And it's like, no, it's just he was a guy with a favor and a free afternoon.
Very good. Now I was gonna ask you, for anyone who doesn't know this, because I think this is not very common, or maybe I am ignorant and I never heard about a betrothal before. Is this a traditional thing, or is this a common thing?
It is traditional in countries that are traditional. In the modern day, it is rather forgotten about. I mean, the notion of marriage has changed enormously over even just the last 20 years. But in more general terms, it's kind of become much more Western, quote unquote, and by that I mean more American. Many traditional cultures have betrothal. For example, one of the most famous betrothals is, of course, the Blessed Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph. They were betrothed. They weren't married in the sense that we understand it, but they were more than engaged. And so, engagement is the kind of term which we have for an intent to marry, and in many ways, this functions in the same way betrothal used to, but it's not quite the same thing. So, for example, with betrothal, and I asked Canon Justin Ong at the Immaculate Heart of Mary if he wanted to do it, and he just all caps replied, "Yes!" Giant exclamation mark. A lot of priests are very happy to do it if they know what to do, if they know what it is, and essentially, it is a more formal version. It's one of the lesser rites, I believe, in the church. It's not one of the great things. It's not marriage. But there are witnesses, and there is the man and the woman, and they kneel before the priest, and they say a certain number of prayers, and they make a promise before God that they are going to marry each other, and the engagement ring is blessed, and then, the man puts them from finger to finger and says the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then puts it on the ring finger. And as far as we're concerned, no, it's not beyond doubt at that point, because it's not a sacrament. Things can happen. But it is the intention before God and before man to marry each other. And it is very beautiful. It has graces with it that secular, commoner garden engagement does not have, because it brings God into it, brings the church into it in a way that what is now seen as a normal engagement does not. And so I think it is actually a very important distinction, because not just in the case of tradition, in the case of going back to this older ideal. But the fact that when grace is involved, there's an objective change in the reality of the situation. It's not LARPing. It's not putting on a show because you want to, wouldn't it be nice if we were back in the 1800s? No, grace is involved. It becomes a different thing.
Amazing. And you get married in October?
Yes, October 17.
17 in Canada.
In Canada, in the People's Republic of Kanakistan.
Amazing. How did you meet her?
Well, she is the sister of the former parish priest at the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Her name is Jessica. Now, obviously, her brother was, and still is, Canon Happel, although he's currently in Preston. Reputedly looking 10 years younger. Whether that has anything to do with the fact he doesn't have us knuckleheads to look after anymore, I leave to the opinion of the public. But she was brought over essentially to work as an au pair, which was the cover story. The real underlying was like, let's see if one of these guys in here is worth a shot, and let's see what happens. And then she comes over, and one thing leads to another, and here we are. And thank God.
Who presented you to her?
Oh boy, here we go. That's a good question. In terms of presenting to her, nobody actually presented her to me. I met her. Well, I don't know if I quite met her, but our first interaction was at the Rosary Festival when everyone was marching down the Falls Road, and I think I had a loud hailer and was screaming my head off, shouting the Rosary for all of the people. As many people joke, we have 3 loud hailers and Richard. So it was almost kind of it was just so that give him a loud hailer. It looks important. There's no batteries in it. He'll still be loud enough anyway. And I turn and I see this woman in the crowd who is dressed in a sort of Elizabethan sort of style, and it sticks out. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. She really stood out in a crowd. And it's kind of embarrassing and very funny. I just start shouting at her. Like I'm in the middle of prayers, it's like hello, very nice dress, and I start pointing at things. It's like, yeah, that flag over there, that means that, and we're passing by this. I start going into this weird unpaid tour guide thing in the middle of the thing, and it's very funny in retrospect. And then the thing is over, and I'm like, oh, okay, that was an interesting person. That's kind of weird. And then I go to the Immaculate Heart, and she's there again, and turns up again. And then, dingus that I am, I don't necessarily make the connection, despite the fact that they are siblings. They look very similar. And that took an embarrassingly long amount of time to put together. Right. It even got so bad as saying, I'm from Canada. And it's like, oh, that's funny. So is our priest. In case anybody is ever misled into thinking I'm intelligent, that's how thick I can be.
Right. Very good.
But in terms of various things, there were it was just part of the parish life.
Do you feel that much is going to change in your life, taking this step, receiving the sacrament of matrimony?
Oh,
what
yeah.
do you expect?
I expect the unexpected. It is very daunting because one is stepping in effectively into the shoes of God, and as the husband, and the woman is stepping into the shoes of the church. And so the stakes are quite literally that high. You have to, as the husband, have to love your wife like Christ loved the church. And this is straight from the Pauline epistles. And she has to love and obey you as the church loves and obeys God. And this is very difficult for people to do because we're people. And we are neither the church and especially not God. So we are limited and sinful creatures. We have a lot of preconceived notions about things. We have our self-will, which we have, in my case, repeatedly, endlessly failed to die to. And it is a case of dying to self, reducing oneself for the sake of the other. I think each spouse has to look at the other and say, I must decrease and they must increase. And as long as both are doing that, then something of the Edenic marriage of Adam and Eve is restored on the earth, and something much more important, the mystical marriage of God and his people, is presaged in the family home, not just in history or in the stories in the Bible, but actually in every household. You could have this sublime cosmic reality reproduced in a small scale. And I think that's a marvelous and entirely undeserved act of generosity on God's part, that he's going to stitch something that transcendental into something so ordinary.
And I'm sure you know, marriage is the only thing that wasn't destroyed when God started his relationship with humankind, and will not be destroyed. Started in Genesis, it goes into Apocalypse, and at the end of the times there's going to be a marriage. The church, the bride of Christ, will be married again. Will complete the grace of the full marriage with Christ when he returns. And that is beautiful, and that is amazing. And I love to see this enthusiasm and this perspective that you have. And this goes very much on the same direction. If you haven't heard, we in the Legion of Mary organized a retreat called Rediscover the Path a few months ago during Lent. And there is one question that we call ourselves brothers and sisters in the Legion of Mary, and that is merely because we are in Christ brothers and sisters. And so Kieran Wright, we call him Brother Wright, he made a question in one of the talks Father Graham gave, and he asked what are the benefits, or what is the difference, or why should someone consider getting married in a church? And he mentioned married but not churched. And the basic answer, very basic response Father Martin gave, was watched by over 100,000 people. And that is amazing, because many people nowadays, and it's good that we start in the second episode talking about marriage, because many people despise marriage because they don't see the point in getting married in a church. And you just heard Richard talking with such enthusiasm and love, because he's going to take first a step further in his spiritual life. He's going to take a sacrament, and he's going to receive graces, and God is going to bless his family.
Now, it's all well and good for me to say that, all of this. Check back, when it's 4 o'clock in the morning and it's my turn to change the child's nappies, and I've got a headache and it's boiling hot, and that's when check back with me to see if I'm still highfalutin and philosophical and theological then.
Yes, but you see this the way you're looking at the sacrament is amazing, and that already breaks a lot of objections from people who say, well, what's the point, or whatever. But anyway, let me share, just so we move on. When I was a teenager, and throughout my life, I always felt very lonely. And that is terrible, I read once a book from a doctor. I used to write his novels, and he said the strongest person in the world is the one who bears loneliness the most. And throughout my spiritual life, my life with God, I had some encounters with Jesus, and he made sure that I understood that he was with me. But still, I wasn't a person who always had too many friends, and for some periods in my life, I felt very lonely.
Yeah.
And so when I came to receive Jesus in the sacrament of matrimony, and when I knelt down to receive the Eucharist, I had a boiling emotion inside of me. And I heard it. I didn't hear anything, actually. I came to a realization. It's like a step in my life was clicking. I was going something further in my life. And when I received Jesus, that was the first time I received him as one body and one soul with my wife. That was amazing. And you see, when people say we don't need the sacrament, they lose so much.
Well, people say they don't need the sacrament for... There's a lot of reasons. I mean, they're all crap reasons, but there's a plurality of reasons. You get the people who will say, well, I don't need a piece of paper to prove my love for this person and the other. And it's like, I've never encountered a person who has that belief who is a serious person. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to say it. They're not serious people. They don't... If you cannot commit to what is at that point the easiest thing in the world to commit to, you are with someone who you love. Perhaps you even have children with them by this point, and you have all of the natural inclinations to the good, but you will not cross the Rubicon and actually commit to it despite everything else. I think that's an enormous, failure of character, and it indicates, I think, a fundamental cowardice. There are those also who refuse the sacramental marriage because they want to have some other damn foolish sort of thing, and we see this in the South, where Catholic marriage is now, depending on what thing you've read, I saw one that it said it's the third most popular, or the second most. You have all these silly pagan hand fasting things where, may it maybe be wed as long as love lasts. And it's all so that people can have an excuse to be degenerate, so that they can have a backdoor out of the relationship, so that they can go off and be polyamorous or can cheat, have an open relationship, all this sort of things. Because modern people, especially the younger generations, are very afraid. And they're very lonely. Loneliness is an enormous and largely spoken about but not actually engaged with issue, because there is no way to fix it, because the society that we have built for ourselves is a loneliness machine. We isolate it. We've torn up all of our old communities. We've packed people into cities where they don't know people a street over or even a house next to it. I've lived in an apartment complex for 3 years. I know the name of my neighbor's dog. I don't know the name of my neighbor. And that's partially, maybe me, but there's something fundamentally very strange there. I don't know anybody where I live. I know the person who I'm a housemate with, and that's it. Anybody else out the window, they could be breaking into cars, or they could be getting into their cars and driving away. I don't know. And that's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And we've come to the point where marriage is such an important issue. And I think Catholics, we have allowed ourselves to fall asleep on the watch in one particular way, especially faithful Catholics, because we all know that the last battle is over the marriage. But we think that, we don't believe in divorce, we don't believe in abortion, we don't believe in contraception, we're fine. We are whatever section we are, if we consider ourselves quote-unquote trads, or if we consider ourselves just faithful, ordinary Catholics who believe in the magisterium and love the Pope and love all of the teachings of the Church, that because we tick the boxes, that we're somehow secure. But we're not. Everywhere I go in Catholic world, I just see people bashing each other. Men bashing women. Women bashing men. Nobody seems to like each other. Nobody seems to trust each other. I have friends, men and women, who will not pursue Catholic men or Catholic women romantically. They want to find Protestants or seculars and convert them later. They just can't trust or like the people sitting next to them in the pews, going to Mass with them, people who are all sharing one bread, who are all supposed to be one body, but they look at them with withering contempt. And that makes me so very sad, because it is missing the wood for the trees. And it means that we are as, if not in many ways more, susceptible to this satanic trick than the seculars. Because in many ways, they're still performing the functions of marriage. They're doing it outside of the church. They are doing it in sin. But if we, as the Catholic communities, fail to marry within the church, well, we have marriages with what? Protestants, schismatics, non-believers, people who will go along with going to Mass because they like us and maybe will let us raise the children Catholic. They'll sign a piece of paper, but it's not in their hearts. I don't know how anyone can think it is okay to pursue someone, to marry them, who then will not be able to receive communion with them.
That's madness.
It is madness. It is a satanic insanity, and it is absolutely everywhere. It is infecting both sides. And men and women, we are both fallen. We are both caught in traps of the world, and we are both laboring under curses from the fall. And unfortunately, we hate to look inwards. I know, very, very reasonable complaints about men's behavior I sometimes hear, and I can admit they're all true. But I get defensive because there is that. No, I don't want to look at my faults. I want to look at theirs. I want to complain about their faults, and the same thing happens on the other side. No, why are you blaming us for this? It's men's fault, it's women's fault. It's just everyone pointing fingers at each other. And nothing can ever be solved in the spiritual life if you blame anyone else. All the spiritual fathers, every single one of them, they all say exactly the same thing. If there's anyone to blame, it's yourself. Look inwards. You are the sinner. I am the sinner. The person who is responsible for Christ's crucifixion is not the Romans and it's not the Hebrews, it's me. Because insofar as it is in my power to crucify my God, I have done so. And have done so exceedingly throughout my whole life. If we start with that basic idea of self-accusation, then we will stop blaming other people. But I think we need an enormous revolution of morals in the church and in the world. We need people to become exceptionally serious very quickly, quick sticks, or else things are going to get very, very nasty, and they're already pretty poisonous. I'm enormously happy with the Holy Father for producing material condemning, for example, the negative impacts of AI. But I think he should probably, if I were him, or if I could speak with him, I would probably go further, so that they talk about loneliness, talk about the fact that young men and women aren't getting married, talk about the fact that this is an offensive against marriage by Satan that all of the generals have failed to notice. And that's frightening. Because people can point out at everything else. It's like, oh, it's this, that, and the other. It's like, okay, fine. But we're aware of those problems. We're aware that divorce is seen as perfectly fine or even empowering. We are aware of the issues of, contraception and abortion. At least we should be. But there's plenty of material that is written in the church, and there's plenty of good, holy, and pious priests and Catholics and bishops who are willing to stand up on this issue. But I think the other battle lines are so recently drawn that when the front is collapsing, nobody notices, and that's what gets me a little worried.
That's amazing that we started and we gave such an amount of time speaking about the sacrament of matrimony. We are the Legion of Mary. We are this organization that was founded in Dublin by a man, lay person, who believed in the consecration to Our Lady. He learned through the book written by Saint Louis de Montfort how to be a true devout of the Virgin Mary. And he founded this organization to help people, obviously, to spread the devotion. But the goal of the Legion of Mary is to increase the holiness in its members, in seeking God's will. And it's amazing that we are Catholic. We have the church, and through the church we have the 7 sacraments. So we started off talking about the sacrament of matrimony. We have another 6. We're not going to speak about them all, but I would like to bring you to your baptism, if we will. But also, let me make a parenthesis here. If people never heard about, we have a new website for the Legion of Mary in the Diocese of Down Connor. You can check out at legionofmarydc.co.uk or legionofmarydc.com. There's plenty of information about our organization, where we started, where we are today. We are in all the 5 continents. The biggest concentration of the Legion of Mary is in the Philippines. And we have so much information there. You can look by your postcode if you live here in the north and try to find a meeting that we call Praesidium near you.
And if you're listening, I encourage you to set up a Praesidium on Vostok Station in Antarctica, because wouldn't that be a hoot?
Very good. But anyway, check out our website and find out more about the Legion, and maybe you consider joining us as well. That's why we're here. So, Richard, can you do you remember anything about your baptism?
No, that's a little young to remember. I have a pretty good memory.
Very good.
I can remember when I was a child, but I was baptized, I think it was in February 1995. I was born in November 1994, and I was baptized in the Augustinian church on Meath Street, the same church which had a bit of a fire problem several years ago, but fortunately my baptismal certificate didn't go up in a puff of smoke. I was baptized. I lived for a short amount of time in an apartment in Dublin, which I still remember and can remember the floor plan of.
Very good.
Then moved out to sort of countryside commuter belt area where I lived in agricultural isolation for many, many, many more years to come.
And there you lived such struggle, right? Without much formation about Catholic Church and the sacraments per se.
I had the dubious formation offered to people in the national school system through the Alivo curriculum. Now, in terms of a curriculum, in better times, it would be okay. But given the fact that it did not produce, I think, a single vocation out of anybody in my school, or indeed perhaps any other school for that matter, shows that it is woefully unfit for task. I think I spent more time learning about the Old Testament Seder, and indeed reenacted one, Prince of Egypt style, than I ever did about the sacraments of Eucharist, for example. And we were given an education in a religion that was not fit for the times that we were in, but did not know that we were in.
Just briefly, Richard, you went through a very difficult childhood after a series of people dying in your family, and the one that really marked you was your aunt.
Which, yeah, and she was not perhaps the relation I was closest to, but again, I've given a version of this in my testimony, which is, there's video of it on YouTube. But essentially, my aunt died quite young, and she died of cancer, and it was a very depressing death. Cancer is again, everybody hates it, but it was the first time I had seen somebody in the stages of dying. Practically everybody else, because I was too young and too far away, they were just kind of, oh, granddad's in the hospital, visit him in the hospital, there's the subtext of it being the last time, but you're a kid and don't get it, and he's dead. But this was, I could see her fighting and losing the whole time. And it was really sad and depressing and morbid. And when she died, and there was the wake in the funeral home, they botched the embalming. So what I can always remember is how kind of desiccated and blackened the tips of her fingers were, and how they started to shrink a little bit. And it was very formative for me, and not in a good way.
Because of your lack of information then, you weren't told about these things, right? I just suppose. You decided to make a vow to be against God, or something like that, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, because now, in terms of death, I mean, your grandparents die, the dog dies, the goldfish dies. You know, we know what that is. And I think of the Western cultures, the Irish culture is perhaps one of the healthiest, because we have the tradition of wakes. The wake is, I think, one of the healthier aspects of Irish culture, where especially the young people can have a tactile experience of death, where they come in and they see the body. There's a viewing. There is, at least traditionally, a few drinks, stories, jokes. You know, the classic Dave Allen bit where when you have a wake, you die and you're laid out in the coffin, and all your friends gather around you with a glass in your hand, and they say, "Here's to your health."
How did you come to hold your aunt's hand?
Well, I didn't. I couldn't. I just looked at it, and
You just looked at it.
Yeah, I wasn't putting my hand anywhere near that.
Right.
But this is an example of. I of course knew death, but all of the other deaths have been fine, quote unquote. Grandparents are kind of supposed to die. That's in the order of things. They're old. Animals are, whatever. You're not happy about it as a child. But I saw what seemed to be a very grotesque, sad, depressing, pointless death and indignity in death. There was no silver lining in this for me. I didn't feel closer to my family because of it. And I blamed the only person that I could think to blame, which was God. And in my despair, I was running around outside, and there were all these trees, and this is the evocative scene. I found all these vines, and it was the only thing that I could break. It was because everything else was too high up or too permanent, like car windows or anything like that. So I just tore all of the vines off and I cut up my hands horribly, and I just screamed that I hated God and that I would, that I just told God that I hated him. And I made a sort of impromptu, sort of interior promise that I would always be against him and everything he stood for, which is an interesting sort of position to come to as, I think, a 10-year-old.
After that, there was an episode where your father had some images of the Sacred Heart, and you were stabbing the Sacred Heart.
Well, we printed, and until comparatively recently, we print missalettes, which is technically still the business I'm in, ironically enough. And one of the particular branding, I suppose, features of our product was that the missalettes are coded by liturgical season and by feast. And there would be images of our Blessed Lord on this, usually Sacred Heart, but there are various kinds. And I would gather them up, and I would stab them with, I suppose, what's the word, screwdrivers, or would tear into them and bite them and gnaw at them with my teeth in a kind of perverse, hateful parody of the Eucharist. And I made all sorts of outlandish and cruel fantasies of what I would do to God's church had I infinite power and all the time to lavish my resentful fantasies upon them.
That's madness, because we are in June, and this is the month the church helps us to remember the devotion to the Sacred Heart.
Behold the heart which has so loved man, which has loved him so little in return.
Yes, so from this, Richard, you went through school, secondary school, university. When did you turn your eyes back to God?
I wish it was in one go. Chronologically, in terms of, days, hours, and minutes, comparatively, I was not this hateful monster against God for all that long. It was a couple of years. But when you're 10, that's a fifth of your life. Mm-hmm. I looked around for something to believe in, something that was grand enough to replace this notion of Christianity, so I fell into a kind of materialist Marxist-Leninism. And I did my level best to make atheists of all of my little school friends, which didn't work out so well because I was clearly obsessive and not very charismatic at the time. And just clearly going through something. It was very obvious that I was processing something extremely badly, and they wanted nothing to do with it. Which is not to say that I'm sure they had their own adventures in secularism later, as did practically my entire generation. But my Marxist missionary efforts were a dismal failure, thank God. By the time of my confirmation, which I had decided was a rather cynical exercise in which I could get some money out of my family, and I didn't have a choice in the matter, because everyone gets put on the same sacramental conveyor belt as the children. You have to be baptized in order to get into the schools, and then whole classes go into communion, whole classes get confirmed, unless you are, Protestant or from some other religious background and have a few bits of paperwork. you're getting confirmed. Which was absurd because I had no belief in the process. But so I said, okay, I'll get it over and done with. And my parents were kind of pleading with me, like, it's just the last thing we want you to do. Just go through with it and we'll never take you to Mass again, which was a laugh because they never did anyway. But I kind of popped out the other side. In the run-up to my confirmation, I began to genuinely feel that there was some kind of struggle within me that was very surprising. I felt an external sort of pressure kind of pushing all of this malice out of me. And I did feel dimly and bewilderingly that there was some kind of battle over my soul. In which case, at the end of it, realizing that something non-materialist had happened, I was like, okay, I don't know exactly what happened, but this is clearly not a purely material world, which is very verbose understanding for a 12-year-old, but, that was the kind of strange child that I was.
After that, when was your next encounter with God?
Well, I started at 12, and I kind of went out and was kind of like, okay, what is this? And I started looking at these sort of documentaries that were on what was the History Channel just past its prime. History Channel was in rapid decline. It had stopped quite showing so many wonderful documentaries about the First and Second World War and had started to slip in the odd one about Atlantis or ancient aliens, which we know where it went. But they kind of put out these Left Behind style documentaries. It was a documentary adaptation of Left Behind. This is actually an interesting detail. You've seen The Chosen, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
Now, The Chosen, the people who produced that are a Protestant evangelical family.
Yeah.
And they were also the same people who put out the Left Behind series, which is this post-rapture novel series of what happens when all of the Bible-believing Protestants vanish in the twinkling of an eye and the rest of us idol-worshipping papists are left behind to deal with the world and deal with the rise of the Antichrist. And they kind of riffed on that a little bit in this documentary series. But it was the first time I was hearing like eschatology and like where this is all going, because the Christianity, the Catholicism that I was raised with, it wasn't really going anywhere. It was like, Christ came and he taught this thing and to be nice to everyone and not to punch your sister and steal from kids next to you. And when we die, we go to heaven, and, that's kind of it. But there was no indication of like, okay, so does the world just exist forever and we're forever like dying and going to heaven? So it's this continuous process. It's like there was no concept of a bookend of like, where is this all going? Where is, the Book of Apocalypse, which of course is tough reading for a grown adult, never mind for 10-year-olds. So I understand why. But it was a little bit, it was a road leading nowhere. And now I finally said, so that's the purpose of Christianity. That is why Christ preached this message. It's like, okay, we're going to gather all people into one church, and then there's going to be a series of events, and then the world's going to end. And I found that very compelling. And a lot of things in it tracked with my understanding of the world, which, maybe I'm slightly conspiratorial-minded. But I started to get into it, and I would go into the street, and there were these Protestants coming from Belfast who would come down and they would preach their version of the gospel, and they would hand out Jack Chick tracts, which are the most hysterical anti-Catholic nonsense you've ever heard of. But they were passionate and they believed in something, which is more than I can say for anybody else in my family or otherwise religiously. And I sort of muddled along. I was reading more and more, but it wasn't until I was about 14. So it was about, another 2-3 years maybe of kind of learning and reading the Bible and kind of creating this very eclectic sort of Protestant Catholic home bake Build-A-Bear religion. I had a little bit of rapture theology there, little bit of sacramental priesthood here, a little bit of Old Testament, no hide laws, Jews go to heaven, they don't need to be baptized, a little bit of Pope as Supreme Pontiff over here. It was a real strange mix. And when I was 14, essentially the train wreck, the emotional train wreck that had been my life from childhood onwards had reached pretty much it was as bad as it was going to get. And I had this kind of mental and spiritual crisis, and I had to move schools. And in that kind of darkness, I had these extraordinary spiritual encounters with Christ and with the other fella. And it really sharpened the nature of the spiritual to me. Because from 12 to, let's say, 14, I wasn't going to Mass. I was very, I suppose, symbolic about a lot of things. I was kind of a Jordan Peterson Catholic before Jordan Peterson, where it's kind of like, oh yeah, a lot of these things are symbols. Adam and Eve are symbolic of this, that, and the other. Cain and Abel, it's a representation of Anatolian clashes between, clashes in Paleolithic or Neolithic Anatolia between settlers and hunter-gatherers. But then after this, when I began to become truly aware that there is a spiritual war going on, and whether we like it or not, we are all in it, that made me suddenly very, very aware of what I had to do and what I had to be. And so I was like, okay, we're going to go to Mass. I'm going to start going to confession. I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to start doing that. And it was very imperfect. And there were wobbles and such and so on. There's a line from one of the Eastern mystics, which is like, you are running a race. Do not be surprised if you should stumble. Although I did perhaps more than stumble. I kind of fell flat on my backside.
All of us.
Oh yeah, I pratfalled a few times. But anyway, I kind of came out the other side and went to university. And university, I went to Maynooth for too long and made some great friends there and some even better enemies. And it was an interesting sort of cheek and jowl experience of going to the seminary to eat lunch with the seminarians, despite the fact that I wasn't one, and getting rip-roaring drunk on the weekend. And it was a sort of clashing of hypocrisies, that I was a hypocrite. And a hypocrite, for those of you who don't know, is an old Greek word for an actor. It's one who wears masks. I had two faces. I had the face in the church and I had the face in the pub, and they did not look the same. I was two, sometimes more than two different people. And that was its own spiritual swamp that I kind of languished in, probably from, let's say, 2013, which is when I started going to university and developed an interesting relationship with alcohol. I knew him well enough to call him John Daniels. All the way from 2013, I would say probably to like lockdown. So a period of about 7 years. And the first 3 of those from, college, I was coloring outside of the lines, in terms of God's law. In the latter half of it, things became much, much better. 2018, I kind of cleaned myself up a lot, stopped drinking for the most part, went on a few pilgrimages, made a few better friends, became a better Catholic, went to my first Latin Mass, and so on and so forth. But I think it was, in many ways, lockdown was a real catalyst moment for me. It's the latest iteration.
Did you join the Legion of Mary while you were in university?
Yes, I did. I believe, I can't quite remember when. If I poked around on my Facebook, I could probably find the messages that had it. But it was I think it was in my master's degree, so I think it was from 2016 onwards. I think I joined in maybe 2017.
Do you remember who invited you?
It was a woman called Lucia Diamond. She was a student from Donegal who, I don't know what she was studying, but she was there, and she was a lovely young woman. Don't know what she's up to now. I sent her an email or a text or Facebook message or something like 3 years ago when I was like, hey, I'm rejoining the Legion of Mary. What do I have to do anything? And she's like, oh, no, it's fine. Just go, just turn up to the meeting. I was like, I don't need yours. I heard you have to get a letter from the person. It was like, no, that's only if it's within 12 weeks. Don't worry about it. And I was like, oh, and how are you, by the way? Click. So it was it was a good experience. They kind of made me acting treasurer for a while. Our chief expense was on pizza. We bought a lot of pizza to try and get students to come in and then harangue them about their... Definitely not judging them for all the things that I was doing. No, sir, that couldn't be me. But it was a good experience.
And then what was the most interesting thing that you did while you were in the Legion at university?
We did a lot of what would now be termed street contact work. Although it could probably be called, I don't know, pavement contact work. We would do usual things. We would bring people into this little coffee room There was a group called the St. Catherine Society, which was one of the many student union groups, and they had free tea and coffee, and I horrifically abused their generosity. I would sit there all day, waffling, pontificating, avoiding doing any work in my masters, and just drinking tea and coffee and being a nuisance to the poor old Salesians who were running the place. But one of them was during the abortion referendum, which was very energetic, and especially in my university, we would go out and we would try and talk to people and try to convince them to vote for the culture of life as opposed to the culture of death. And I'm very sorry to say we miserably failed in that endeavor, but we did many other things that were good. We did a lot of trying to convert Christian Union Protestants over to the One True Church, and we did a lot of dialogue with Muslim students, which I don't know if it quite went anywhere, but it was certainly interesting. And certainly formative for me.
And at some stage, you came in, you joined the Legion of Mary here in the north, here in Belfast.
Ricocheting all over the place. So
do you remember the year?
Of course I do. I remember it was September 2023.
23. Just hold there. We're going to go on a short break. And whenever we come back, we're going to talk all about those experiences you had from September 2023. Welcome back to the second part of the second episode. How you doing, Richard?
Slightly more lemony.
I don't know why this reminds me of another thing that you said, but
it's deja vu all over again.
Right, so you stopped talking when you said...
That's a rarity, isn't it?
You said you moved to the Legion in the north. Now, if I may, I would just share a few words about how did I join the Legion.
I can't stop you.
Right, so I was in Belfast in 2015, and then I remember Deacon Greg approached me and he invited me. At first I thought it was too much and I wasn't interested. Then in 2016, Brother Felipe Cunha met me after Mass, and he invited me to the Legion again, and I wasn't interested. But then there was a retreat of the Legion of Mary by the end of 2016, which pictures you can find in our website. There's a picture of me there, in these struggles that I was having when I moved to this country and trying to learn the language and all. There was a period of adaptation, and that took too long of my time here. I regret, all wrongdoing that I did during this time. But I went to this retreat, Catholic Conference of the Legion of Mary in 2016, I think it was October. And for the first time in about 2 years that I was living in this country, I had an amazing encounter with God in the middle of the community. And I remember Father Black talking about Mass. He said this: you need to learn to participate or to watch Mass as a child playing in the playground. So there is a lot of signs, there is a lot of language, there is a lot of things that you need to learn in order to be able to comprehend what's going on. But anyway, after that, there was some talks, and there was a moment where people were going to confession, and I ended up going to confession with Father Black. And at the time, he was with his hands just before giving me the absolution after I confessed my sins. I saw some black energy coming out of my soul. There was some smoke, dark smoke, and this was being sucked at his hands, and they were dissipated. They vanished whenever they got near his hands, meaning my sins were forgiven. But this experience was so important in my life. And after that, in the next year, I joined the Legion of Mary. And my life living in Belfast was never the same, because for the first time, I had friends who shared common beliefs, common values, and faith was at the center. And to me, the Legion of Mary was essential for me to live in a state of grace, given the world we live in. Have friends to share experiences and share life with people who want to live the same sort of lifestyle that you do, avoiding sin. And to do something, because we're all called to do something. And that is the biggest, I think, the biggest grace of the Legion is we have in front of us, in a very easy way, means to be evangelists. How was your experience joining the Legion in the North, Richard?
Well, it was certainly a lot less Stephen King than what you just described. It was a little bit Green Mile there. Essentially, in 2023 was a very important year. It was the year my father passed away. And he died in April. He had been, in the previous year, October 2022, he was diagnosed himself with cancer. And by April, he was dead. And there's a line in one of Cormac McCarthy's novels which says that it is the death to which the son is heir to more so than his father's possessions, which stuck with me when I read it. Such a complicated relationship and a complicated man and a complicated house, things suddenly simplified, and I couldn't stay there anymore. And so a friend of mine, who was also a legionary, Michal Pierce, he was the other fellow who was there as a witness for my betrothal. He sent me a message saying that if I wanted to get out of the house, if I wanted to just take some time, a couple of weeks or a month, whatever, there was a cheap apartment going in Belfast. There was a guy called Jamie Nugent, whose wedding I'm attending next week, who was in Steubenville, and while he was out of the country, he was renting his room out. And so I moved in, and my holiday, my sort of couple of weeks to kind of clear the air and kind of solidify myself, that very quickly became a month became a couple of months. I moved up in July, and I had pretty much made the promise to myself that I was not going to go back, because I couldn't stay at home. It was not conducive to spiritual life. The amount of anger, the amount of resentment, the amount of sorrow in that house was not something that I could thrive in. I needed to get away, because I was a very angry and bitter and nasty person all the way through. And still have my old Adam continually reasserting himself. So it was very difficult to be a charitable person under that amount of stress, and with the past so near to the present. So I needed a clean break. The flip side of that is I didn't know anybody in Belfast. I knew one person who didn't live there. He lived in Derry, so I knew nobody. And I kind of I hung around the Latin Mass, because that's what I had been attending in Dublin. Not doing a great job of it, and not being a very good example to anybody of a Catholic, but a very good example of a Pharisee. And I went around the Latin Mass up here, and I liked it, and I liked various other things, and I thought, maybe I can give this a shot. And I visited the Praesidium that used to be up there, and there wasn't a lot of people in it. And I was like, okay, this is a long way from where I'm staying. It's 2 buses away. So I don't know if I can do a lot of stuff here. This is a lot less convenient for me. So I kind of put that on the back burner. But then I was approached, I believe it was by a guy called Joel Scott. And he invited me along to this, and he said that, the Legion, we meet down here in Frank Duff House. And, of course, there was Felipe Cunha, who was, of course, a great legionary. He was very friendly and very opening and obliging when I came up first. We introduced ourselves, and it was very pleasant. And he was in charge of this large, young, vibrant, active Praesidium, the biggest one I'd ever been in. Probably the biggest one practically anyone would be in, which was Our Lady Queen of Peace, which met and still meets right here in Frank Duff House in Cliftonville Road. And I was hooked. It was obvious. I was like, okay, I'm going to say yes to everything. This was my attitude. I had said no to God so many times. Every day. With petty sins, with great sins, with little rebellions, with huge rebellions. And I thought, you know what? My father is dead. I have no prospects. I'm not seeing anybody. I haven't seen anybody for years. I'm lost. My father is dead. My family is gone. I don't have anything. I don't believe everything. Everybody politically that I ever believed in betrayed me fundamentally. Every ideology I ever believed in came up as nothing. I had nothing and no friends and nothing except God and His Blessed Mother. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to say yes to everything. And so I did. Someone said, do you want to come join the Legio Mariae? I said, sure. He said, you want to come join the Knights of St. Columbanus? I said, okay, sure. You want to come do this? Sure. You want to come work on the Home Education Awards for the Knights of St. Columbanus? Sure. You want to come stand outside the stall for the Legionary Mariae every weekend, rain, hail, or shine? Sure thing. You want to come to this procession? You want to do this? You want to carry Our Lady statue around on your crumbling spine for 3 hours? Sure thing, I'm there. I just kept saying yes, yes, yes to everything. And the big thing of that was turning up to the meeting. And, then just one thing after another happened. I got work. I got good paying work. I got another job. I got to move to a different apartment. It was better, had less black mold. The rent was super affordable because a very, very great Catholic gave me a very cheap rent. And just one good thing after another happened because whether I knew it or not, I was mimicking Our Lady's fiat. Just yes.
I think you said your story, your joining in the Legion was much milder than my sort of background before I joined, but I think it's much more dramatic. You were in a very bad shape, and you were, as you said yourself, you were lost. And what would you say the Legion did to you when you look back at the state that you were, and you saying yes to everything, and what this saying yes to the Legion specifically made on your life?
Well, it did what functionally every army does, and I think it's funny. The Legion Mariae is the only army in human history that advances with its retreats, and it just gave me structure, which is a classic thing that armies do and religious societies do. It gave me a prayer routine. It gave me a real, no, you have to pray the rosary every day. Stop making excuses. Stop doing that just during Lent. Pray it every day. Wear this. Do that. Be here at this time with these people. Do this. Follow this example. And I knew pretty much the basics. I had done plenty of duties, and I had taken plenty of meetings, and I had done various things like that. But this was big leagues. This was the mean streets of Belfast, where people are not always so polite because of sectarian reasons, not merely because they are a 19-year-old university communist with a nasty opinion. No, there are some serious boys and girls in the city who really hate Catholicism, and they will let you know if you talk to them on the street and ask to give them a Miraculous Medal sometimes. And it was really good. The stall duty was so important.
Tell us, what is this stall duty?
So the stall duty is a duty with a stall. Next question. No, we have a large stall outside St. Mary's Chapel Lane. And practically every Saturday, since time immemorial, legionaries, sometimes 3, sometimes as many as even it's been up to 8, stand outside and have miraculous medals and leaflets and things on everything from confession to the Sacred Heart of Jesus to Our Lady of Guadalupe, so on and so forth. And they talk to people, which is such a luxury. We go from morning, noon, and night, and we cannot talk to anybody. You go into a shop, you check the food out yourself. You go into a fast food place. You have a horrible, cracked, greasy screen which you order from, and an anonymous hand gives you the material. You can work from home and never see anybody. You're certainly, if the statistics are to be believed, you're certainly not going to have a intimate partner to talk to you at home, and you're probably going to be worked so much that you don't want to talk. And having somebody kind of come up to you on the street, and they're not trying to sell you anything. It's not, hey, can you sign this for Dogs Trust so that I can get paid and leave? It's not, hey, can I get you to sign this petition so that my narrow political goals can be achieved? It's, hey, I don't know you. I have never known you, and I probably never will know you, but I want you to go to heaven. And in the 45 seconds you'll give me, I'm going to give you the best shot at doing that. And that's a very efficient kind of pounds per square inch of supernatural love. And it trains you in that. And it trains you in confidence and in seeing the saint in everybody that they can be, and to not judge anybody that you see.
It's very interesting that we started talking about the sacrament of matrimony. We touched on the subject of loneliness because I brought that up. And now it seems to me that what you say, and the Legion is breaking that wall of loneliness and the difficulty in this country to speak to people. And it's opening doors for people not to go to a pub, drink the whole day, and put their lives under the influence of alcohol, but it's opening the doors of church and offering them an opportunity of grace. So the Legion is doing marvelous work in this style duty.
And it is actually, fewer and fewer people are going to the pub and drinking all of the room because it's too expensive. And it would actually be more social. That's a far more social way of self-destruction than most people are engaged with, which is more or less, I suppose, traditional, where it's so new.
Talk about drugs then. Father Martin mentioned that.
There's any number of
is the
rabbit holes
one of the biggest issues that he faces. This one of the biggest pastoral challenges in Belfast. So because drugs offer you an opportunity to sort of run away from your reality, forget about the pain, forget about...
You lose yourself.
And lose yourself. And you can do that lonely.
Yeah. There comes a point in a lot of people's lives when they if they could reach into the mirror and strangle what they see, they would. But if they run away from themselves, then they can forget that they hate themselves. And there's various forms of that. There are people who dissolve themselves into a political movement. They just become a vector for a certain political program, or they become addicted to drugs or alcohol or pornography or violence or hatred. Anything that dissolves the self. In Christ we become our truest self. In heaven we become perfected. We become that which we always should have been and by grace have become. We regain that primordial innocence that was lost in the garden. But the dissolution of the self is the closest thing. It is the earthly civic nirvana, the extinguishing of the candle. I just don't want to be. I can't be. Life is agony. And it's a little suicide. Every addiction is a little suicide.
And so the Legion is meeting people where they are,
100%.
In the reality they are. And can you remember now one experience that maybe was interesting or was important or was sad or was very good that you had on the stall?
I could go on all day.
Tell us one.
Okay. That's hard to say. There was a young woman, and she is a member of a very prominent loyalist militant family. And yet, she loves the Rosary. And she would come up, and she was addicted to heroin, and in miserable straits. And she would come up, and she would beg us for rosaries, and beg us for sacramentals. And her mother would catch her with them, and she would take them off of her and burn them. She would burn the rosaries, and then she would come back to the stall and ask for more. And I have seen in many people's eyes, and in some cases even their hands, the fact that the rosary is like the last chain, the rope they're hanging on to between themselves and God, that they are clutching onto it desperately with a desperate love. And other people, sometimes people very close to them, sometimes the people who should know better, are hacking away at that binding, that rope, that chain, trying to break it. There are others, there was a young man who was an Anglican. He was on a stag do or something like that, or some holiday thing, and we were doing night fever, and I brought him in off the street with all of his mates, and I invited them to adore the Blessed Sacrament, and they all shut up. They all got real quiet. And they came in, and just this guy in particular, kind of sandy blonde hair, glasses, he kind of almost floated. He was transfixed. And he kind of knelt at it, and I said, "That's God." And he just he had this sort of voiceless, wow reaction. And we went through the thing. There was a certain ritual. We kind of do lighting a candle, putting it there, reading a prayer, that sort of thing, praying with them. And after a few minutes, they all kind of left. And his friends kind of rushed off. But he hung back for about 5 seconds, as if he was under some kind of spell or a pall. And I kind of whistled to him. I said, "Get him to turn around." I said, "Become Catholic." And he kind of nodded very eagerly. And he looked like he had walked into a plate glass window. He was just in this state of shock. And then he turned and followed his friends. And I don't know. Who knows what that young man could be even today. And who knows what he could be in the future.
I have a memory of Protestant that I met. I was at the stall as well. And the first thing that he mentioned is, why Mary? Say, you don't need Mary. Mary's dead. And all this sort of things. There was some old legionaries there. And he tried to focus on them because maybe he thought they wouldn't know how to respond. But I addressed him myself. And I told him a story about how archangels met people in the Old Testament. So how St. Michael the Archangel met in the chapter 6 of... I can't quite remember now.
Well, we have an example of St. Raphael.
St. Raphael is with Tobit. There is... but St. Michael met with Joshua in the Old Testament. And then he said, "Are you one of us, or army, or you are against us?" And he says, "I came as from the army of the Lord." And he prostrated himself before St. Michael. When Tobit and his family, Tobias, they learned that who accompanied the young Tobias in the way through Sarah and got rid of the demon and healed his father was St. Raphael, the archangel. And when they learned that he revealed himself, they prostrated on earth and they adored God for hours. And whenever they raised their eyes, he wasn't there anymore. But when St. Gabriel met Our Lady, it's nearly the case that he's the one who prostrated to her. And he said, "Hey, you full of grace." And so this man didn't accept that. But that triggered a text that I wrote called Hail Mary. And that is in the book I wrote as well. But this is just to say these encounters are amazing and they can trigger any reaction from hate to love to from...
one to the other.
Yeah. People can be as far away as they are, and people can come as near the church and be baptized and receive the sacraments and join the Legion of Mary and transform their lives.
And I will say, from stall duty and door to door, I want to meet someone who's angry. I do. That's the person who needs it the most. There was one time, Exploratio Dominicalis, which is a particularly big project. There was a woman who was very upset and she was very angry with myself, and it was incidentally Michal Pierce. my friend, at the door and didn't want anything. And there was a lot of hurt in her life. And I was able to talk to her about the hurt in my life and the fact that we shared pain. And then she invited us in, and it was conversation, and she took some material for the crucified Christ, because I told her, all of your suffering is in his suffering. And that sanctifies it, that elevates it. It's not, as the child version of me saw in my aunt, useless suffering. It is sanctifying suffering. And the very worst thing, the thing that I dread, is apathy. Is, sorry, no thank you. That's the worst of all.
Indifference.
As
the opposite of love.
Yeah.
It's not hate.
Soon to be blessed Fulton Sheen, he would recite this poem of our Lord coming to Birmingham. They would not kill him. They only pass him. They would not hurt a hair of his. They'd only pass him by. And our Lord, he stood and sighed for Calvary. Like, he wished that there was the caliber of men who would hate him and not the weakness of men to ignore him. Because I hated God, but in that, there was the energy to convert it into love. If I had not cared, if I had just decided I was going to play video games and burn my brain out with marijuana, then who knows where I would be. It probably wouldn't bother me. I'd be like, oh, that's fine for them. Religion's cool, dude. Believe what you want to believe. Just, it's not for me. And that is spiritual sloth. And that is really exceptionally more dangerous than hate. As our Lord himself says, I know thy works, thou art lukewarm. Thou art neither hot nor cold. I would that thou were hot or cold, but since thou art lukewarm, I will vomit thee out of my mouth.
Do you recall any other duty that you carried out that was touching or that was impactful, and first for you and then for the person you were meeting, maybe in door to door, or any other duty as well?
Yeah, there were some people that had never been baptized and expressed desire to be baptized. There were people in absolute misery. There was a man who had been kneecapped. And he had a bloody bandage, and he had cling filmed his knee together, and he was hobbling along the street, and he was just miserable. And he just sat next to me. He just cried. He just cried and for his life and for everything that had led to him. And sometimes all we can do is just console somebody and just be a listening ear. And there's many, many cases like that where we just can't just. Again, there are people, street people, homeless, addicts. They are used to the indifference of everybody. The only people in their lives are themselves, who they hate, their dealer, who is killing them, and the other addicts in their lives who are equally as trapped as they are. And sometimes the value of having somebody to be like Christ for them, even in that small capacity, is priceless. There was a young woman who had, she was young and she had been in and out of psychiatric institutions, and she had self-harmed, and she had experienced a lot of very dark things on the streets. And we just sat. It was outside St. Mary's Chapel Lane. We just sat next to her, just talked. There were other people, there were kids who were like I was, kind of lost and uncatechized. And I explained to them, that it's more than. Life is more than the sum of its petty pains and disappointments. That it is not a stupid, ugly, pointless accident. That time is, as they say, time is not a flat circle. It's going in a direction, and that's to heaven. And if only one person could tell them that, then I wanted to be that person. And it's an enormous privilege. It's the greatest of my religious privileges that I've been able to do this, because what it does, I explain this to people when they say about, I don't want to do stall duty. That seems very this, that, and the other. There are people who they might want to do a duty of a rosary or this, that, and the other. But the notion of standing out on the street corner, hail, rain, or shine, and talking to quite literally hundreds of strangers, some of whom may be very hostile, is understandably, intimidating. But I always tell them, like, do you want to step into the Acts of the Apostles? Do you want to step into a story, a biblical story, where Christ and his apostles are just somewhere and doing something and saying something to some people? Because that's what you're doing. You're stepping especially into the Acts of the Apostles, where, one of the apostles is there and he's talking to people and there's a dialogue, and then some people get baptized, and then someone throws a stone, and then somebody is martyred. It's not necessarily that bad, although we do get a bit rowdy sometimes around the 12th. But you see what I mean? It's stepping into the biblical life in a way that other things in my life have not. When you go on pilgrimage, for example, I've been on many pilgrimages. That's very classically medieval. You have this image in your head, Canterbury Tales, perhaps. And the dark night of the soul and the prayers and the vigils and all sort of things. That has its own particular parallel with our glorious past and our even more glorious future. But the proselytization, the preaching, the evangelization, even one-on-one, or sometimes with groups of people, that's New Testament. That's Acts of the Apostles. That is genuinely going forward in a way that makes you feel like maybe I could be a saint. Maybe God can turn this broken, useless thing into something that has value, something that can help others, something that can be a light before men instead of an embarrassment. And I felt that way. I felt like I was an embarrassing failure, that I had nothing in the world of any value, that I had gone to university and wasted my time, that I had had spiritual experiences and squandered them, that I had produced a thesis that almost nobody would read, that I had had relationships that were stupid and bad and pointless, and that everything in my life was gone, and the most fundamental relationship between child and parent, that was also gone because my father was dead and I would never see him again in this life. And when all else was scraped away and I was left with the vast chasm of my own insufficiency and my brokenness, I found self-worth in service to God. And it helped me put myself back together, quote unquote. I didn't put myself back together. I took myself apart. But God put me back together. The Blessed Virgin Mary put me back together.
And the Legion of Mary was
the Legion of Mary
that was used for that.
The Legion
sake.
of Mary was the glue that stuck my soul back together.
Amazing. I was gonna ask you 2 questions before we finished. What would you say now, coming from where you came, going through the path that you took, that led you to today, how important was the Legion to shape you and to bring you where you are now, betrothed, going to get married and move to Canada?
It gave me something to do and somebody to be. It's something that really gave me something to be proud of. Not necessarily myself, but that I was a part of something bigger than myself, which, again, we all are, our nation, the church in general. But it gave me something practical to do. You go to Mass, for many people, and I include myself, it's by and large a passive activity. Maybe say a few interior prayers, and so on and so forth. But with the Legion of Mary, it is the Blessed Virgin Mary turning to you and saying, now what can you do? How can you put your hand to the tiller? Are you willing to say yes? It's going to be difficult. It's going to elasticate your spirit. You're going to have to say yes to things you may not want to. You're going to have to die to self. And that is the beginning and end of all spiritual progress. And it puts you with good people. People with problems, people with sins, people with pasts, people with presents. But they are all people who are trying. And that's all a saint is a sinner who keeps trying. And, the saying is we're the aggregate of the 5 people we spend the most time with. If you spend your time with devoted legionaries who love God and his blessed mother, then you will improve. Frank Duff wrote that the legion is to be like the leaven in the bread. We are that which raises everything. We raise our families, we raise our communities, our country. It is the premier Marian organization in the world. It is the largest lay organization in the world, and it is that for a reason. The Legion of Mary itself is larger than some entire religions by themselves, and that's because it works. It is the army of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and that is not a LARP. That's not a term used to make, a few people feel good about themselves when they're doing something, standing out in a car park, handing out bottles of holy, blessed water, and they're like, "Oh, I'm a spiritual soldier." Like, no, it's not a platitude. It's genuine, because you are going into enemy territory. You're going into the empire of sin. You are going into some very neglected estates, some very spiritually fallen away places. You are going into your own soul, which is the greatest of enemy territories. And you are taking very, very seriously the apostolic life. And this has been a great day for the Legion, because myself and some of the other brethren went down to Newry. And I met there's a guy called Gordon Sellender, and he's in the Legion of Mary. And I met him when I was about 15 years of age. I'm 31 now. I've known him since I was 15. And he would sit next to this statue, these two old women. There's a statue of them. It's nicknamed, as Dubliners nickname everything, the Hags with the bags. And he would sit outside playing guitar with kind of Beatles songs with kind of Marian twists on them. And even though I was a young kind of lost kid, there was something about, he didn't care what people said. He didn't care what people's abuse or ignorance or homeless people trying to steal his money or addicts trying to hassle him. He just sat there with his guitar case full of money that people threw, sitting in a kind of protest outside this sort of abortion medication place and just praising the Blessed Virgin Mary. And just seeing him there just stuck deep in my soul like an arrow into wood. And for years, I would just see him. "Hi, Gordon, how's it going? How's it going?" And no matter where I was in my life, the ups and the downs and the sideways, he was always there and always the same and always playing the music and always doing Our Lady's work. And from the time I was a kid to this morning, all he does is pray, do work for the Legion of Mary, and run marathons for charities, for good Catholic charities. And he is the closest thing to a saint I think I can have a name in my life. And these are the kinds of people you meet in the Legion of Mary. And this is somebody who's just been there my entire life. And it's dovetailed. And, God doesn't make any mistakes. There's no spares. There's no extras in God's drama.
And that reminds me, just to put a cherry on the top of what you spoke about the Legion, St. Augustine said, "There is no saint without a past, and there is no sinner without a future." And the Legion brings hope for both, for the saint to strive for even higher degrees of holiness, and for the sinner to come back to the life of grace and to live a holy life of God, because the Legion seeks the glory of God through the holiness of its members. And the second question I was going to ask you is, would you look to remain a legionary when you move to Canada?
Well, I think that in a sense I can never not be a legionary, because it's such an intrinsic part of my spirituality, and it has given so much. So I'm definitely going to see what can be drummed up over there. I've put out a couple of feelers. I've been looking around. I don't know what the logistics of that are going to be. I don't have any hard and fast answers, but. No, I definitely belong to the Blessed Virgin Mary, so that doesn't matter what continent I'm on.
Amazing. And just not to lose practice, I'm going to go and I'm going to give you this questions, where we call this...
the lightning round.
The lightning round.
The lightning round, brother.
So, I'm just looking here, on the dossier that we did. And so, I'm going to give you this one or two options. Don't hang on them. Just give me a straight answer without thinking. Because if you think, you're gonna overthink, and you're gonna maybe digress.
You're gonna waffle. It's almost like you know me or something.
Right.
Okay. Hey,
Let's go.
Lanarayachara.
Tea or coffee? How do you take it?
Tea, milky, bag in, classic.
A
Youngers.
book that shaped you that isn't the Bible or the handbook.
Again, I referenced it earlier. I think either Cormac McCarthy's All the Pretty Horses, which is perhaps the most beautiful illustration of a tragic love story that I've ever seen. Not necessarily tragic in a Romeo and Juliet sense, but in an ordinary sense. And probably some of the writings of Blessed Fulton Sheen that really stuck in with me. I think going through 3 to Get Married, which a certain canon, not subtly at all, shuffled into a pair of hands close to me. So
Very
I would
good.
say that.
You're already killing the next one.
I'm killing the next
Fulton
one.
Sheen or G.K. Chesterton or someone else entirely.
Oh, it's got to be Blessed Fulton Sheen. You know, he has the advantages. I mean, he's a blessed, he was a bishop, and of course Irish as opposed to English. So he wins on all counts.
A line of poetry you carry around with you.
Had I the heavens embroidered cloths and wrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and the half light, I would spread the cloths under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. He Wishes for the Cloths of Heaven by W.B. Yeats.
The saint after Our Lady you ring the most.
I have a lot of... I really love St. Augustine. We have very similar lives in many ways. I love Blessed Fulton Sheen. I've had a number of spiritual encounters with him. He's not quite apparitions, but he's answered prayers of mine, and I've spoken in mystical ways with him that are very touching and private to me. So I'd say it's definitely him.
Just like Father Graham is 2 then.
Yeah. We
Pick
can't
one.
ask one.
Pick one.
Okay, I have to be Blessed Fulton Sheen. I'm sorry, St. Augustine. I know you have tenure. I did actually thank both of them in my in my masters. In the opening page for acknowledgements, I thanked Professors Fulton J. Sheen and Augustine of Hippo for their patronage. So that's in print.
This one already as well. It's nonsense to ask you Latin Mass or the vernacular.
I love the Latin Mass. I went to it in Malta. It changed my whole spiritual life. It's beautiful, it's reverential, and there's no questions that everybody in it are Orthodox. Small O.
Right, the Republic or the North, where does home feel like now?
That's a good question. Where does home feel like now? I don't know. I'm an Irishman. I love Ireland. I will always be Irish. I will never be anything else. I can't possibly be, and certainly not with hair this color. But definitely the South. There are certain things in the royal county of Meath that really make me nostalgic. But I also love Belfast. There's a lot to love about Belfast. This is the city where I met the love of my life, where I really came into my own with the Legion, where I made some great friends that I will cherish for all time. So, I don't know. I don't believe in a partition between the two, in more ways than one.
Okay, I'll leave you to that. A place that feels like prayer to
Oh,
you.
Loch Derg. That is a place of prayer and penance, and sure, what else do you have? I'm going to try and get back while the weather holds. Or maybe I shouldn't. Maybe it should be extra penitential if we're drowned out of it.
Advice you cheerfully admit to.
I am a very proud man. I'm a very angry man. I'm a spiteful man, to quote Notes from Underground by Dostoevsky. I have a wicked, mean temper, and I'm very proud. And when people underperform, quote unquote, to my lofty expectations, I get very unfairly annoyed at them.
Something that still makes the old wrath flare up.
Public transportation. I have issued more threats verbally against public transportation, north and south, than I would ever care to admit outside of a confession.
One word for the boy you were at 11.
Believe. That was a good word.
One word for Loch Derg.
Penance.
One word for Our Lady.
Help.
One word for what comes next.
Trust.
Richard, we will close with this.
Mm-hmm.
In March, you ended your testimony by asking everyone in that hall to come forth to confession, to adoration, to communion, to rediscover the path and walk upon it. Somewhere tonight, one person is listening to this who is exactly where you were in that wood. Before they go to sleep, would you say to them whatever you would want said?
You don't know how much God loves you. And I don't blame you, because no one ever told you. But someone's telling you now. You are so beloved that if there was nobody else in the world, God still would have died for you, even if it needed to be you to crucify him. If you made the cross and forged the nails and hammered them in yourself, because we all did. We all had a hand in it. But if it was only you, and guilt fell on no other human being, he would have done it eagerly for you. When you realize that for the entire time of creation up until the incarnation, Christ was almost panting with eagerness to be incarnated so that he could redeem mankind, to redeem you, to save you from the demons, literal and figurative, in your life. And he loves you with such a passion that even I don't believe it. So I don't blame you for not believing it either. But trust me, he does love you. He loves you, whatever your condition, whatever you are, whatever you've done. He loves you better than the Blessed Virgin Mary ever loves him. And that's a very important and powerful statement. The most perfect creature, sinless, the highest of creation, could not anywhere near love God near so much as he loves you in the universal wretchedness of mankind. And so know that God, before all time, burned with love for you, even though you were only a dream in his heart. And now that you are here, all he wants, he doesn't want praise, he doesn't want glory, he has all of that. He doesn't need wealth, he doesn't need fame or power, he has all that. All he's missing is you. And he wants you. And he can make all these things that make life seem so wretched and unworthy seem like a bad dream, like a child waking up from a nightmare to find their parents are there and comforting. And I promise you that if you follow him, and when you get to heaven, all the horrors of this life, you will forget them in the first heartbeat, and you will never suffer again.
Amen. I truly believe that. Thank you very much, Richard. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. It's been a pleasure spending this time talking about everything that we spoke about. And I would like to finish this inviting you again to consider joining the Legion of Mary. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
God bless.